The first light of dawn was breaking over the quiet, peaceful, and chilly airport terminal. Inside, near Gate 37, Ibrahim Traoré waited with composure. He wore no formal suit, had no protective detail, and carried nothing ostentatious. To most onlookers, he seemed merely another African passenger. Yet, this individual was far from ordinary. He was Ibrahim Traoré, the esteemed president of Burkina Faso. He favored travel in this manner, understated, private, and without fanfare. No flashing cameras, no grand announcements, that was his style. He believed in connecting with his people, blending in, remaining grounded. His return journey from diplomatic discussions in Europe was no different. Important talks concluded, matters of national gold reserves and Africa's future addressed, but now, his sole desire was to reach home. As he approached the Air France flight bound for Ouagadougou, he offered a warm smile and a greeting in French to an airport staff member. Bonjour, ça va? The worker returned the smile, oblivious to the true identity of the man before him. This anonymity was precisely how Traoré preferred it. He boarded the plane discreetly, exchanged polite nods with the crew, and occupied his assigned seat in business class, row 2A, by the window. No one seemed to notice, or perhaps they didn't care, or so he initially thought. Just a few rows back, hushed conversations were already beginning. A seasoned French executive, the CEO of a major energy corporation, was also traveling to Burkina Faso. He was accustomed to preferential treatment, red carpets, champagne, and every possible first-class amenity. But upon reaching the gate, he was informed that business class was completely booked. The CEO was not pleased. He was not accustomed to hearing the word no. That is when the friction started to build, subtly at first, a simple demand that would soon escalate into a significant incident. The French CEO was unacquainted with refusal. He stood by the boarding gate, flanked by his assistants and airline personnel, his polished shoes tapping impatiently, almost contemptuously. "I am a strategic investor in numerous African projects," he declared, implying that regulations did not apply to him. He demanded an immediate seating upgrade. The gate agents reacted with urgency, conferring in whispers, checking their tablets, but the truth remained simple. Business class was full, all seats occupied. Still, the CEO persisted. This led the airline to summon a senior flight attendant. She was tall, Caucasian, and clad in her Air France uniform. Her name was Claire. She wore a cold, rehearsed smile as she entered the aircraft, tasked with resolving the situation. Once inside, Claire scanned the cabin with piercing eyes, as if searching for something or someone. Her gaze paused momentarily upon spotting a dark-skinned man in seat 2A. Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly, engaged with his phone, as serene as ever. She looked again. No costly timepiece, no accompanying staff, no indication of power, just a person of color in a casual top. She leaned towards another attendant and whispered, "Probably a mix-up." She then approached him, offering a strained smile, and said politely but firmly, "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" Traoré looked up, nodded, and presented it to her. She scrutinized the pass, then back at him. The seat number was correct, but inwardly something felt wrong. In her assessment, he did not resemble someone who belonged in that section. Moments later, she returned with a feigned smile, this time more direct. "Sir, I apologize, but we may need to relocate you to accommodate another passenger. Would you mind moving to economy? We will, of course, provide compensation." There it was, the slight, understated yet cutting. Ibrahim Traoré raised an eyebrow. "And why specifically me?" he asked calmly. "No specific reason, sir," she replied, striving to maintain her composure. "Just a minor adjustment for our esteemed guest." "A guest of greater importance than myself?" he inquired, his voice still even. Claire offered no verbal response, only her smile. Other passengers glanced over, sensing the brewing discomfort, but no one spoke a word. "And Ibrahim?" He simply settled back and stated quietly, "No, I will remain in my seat." The tension had begun, but the full intensity of the situation was yet to unfold. Claire was taken aback. No. A man like him refusing her? She was unaccustomed to such defiance, particularly from an African passenger, and especially on her shift. She forced another smile, but her pride was clearly wounded. Sir, I must insist. This is for operational reasons, she stated, her tone now carrying a hint of ice. But Traore did not waver. He met her gaze directly. If it is purely operational, then kindly explain why I am being asked and not any other passenger. Claire hesitated, clearly unprepared for his calm, reasoned resistance. Around them, several business-class passengers were now watching intently. One man lowered his newspaper. A woman paused her typing on her laptop. Something felt fundamentally incorrect, but no one dared to intervene. The CEO had still not boarded. He was being held at the gate until a seat could be arranged. Claire walked swiftly towards the cockpit, conversed quietly with the captain, then returned with a decision. She said nothing further to Traore this time. Instead, she approached another black man in business class, then a third. She was clearly targeting only passengers who, in her judgment, did not appear to belong. This marked her second significant error. Traore sat silently, observing. His expression remained neutral, but his mind was sharp. He was watching, evaluating, processing. The attempted humiliation did not provoke anger. It sharpened his focus. A young African man, perhaps in his late 20s, looked confused as Claire now gestured towards his seat. You, sir, she directed, we require you to transfer to economy. The young man questioned, why me? Claire offered no explanation, simply reaching for his boarding pass. At that moment, Traore stood up. Enough, he declared, his voice calm but carrying immense weight. You are making selections based on skin color, not on valid tickets. That is called discrimination. Claire turned, visibly unnerved. Sir, I will have to ask you to sit down. Please do not create a disturbance. Traore looked her directly in the eyes. For a second, her breath caught. There was an undeniable quality in his gaze, steady, fearless, commanding, yet she still did not comprehend who he truly was. To her, he was merely a troublesome passenger. She walked away again, fuming internally. These people, she muttered under her breath in French, always causing trouble. The CEO was finally escorted onto the aircraft. Claire greeted him with exaggerated politeness, offering a glass of champagne. We are resolving the seating issue, monsieur, she assured him. Meanwhile, Traore had settled back into his seat. He fastened his seatbelt, his fingers calmly tapping the armrest. He knew he didn't need to articulate anything further, because soon the entire world would understand what had just occurred and precisely who had been subjected to such an affront. The CEO took his place in business class with the air of a monarch returning to his throne. He didn't even spare a glance for Ibrahim Traore as he passed by. Claire, the flight attendant, ensured his utmost comfort, adjusting his seat, offering warm towels, and providing more champagne. The message was unmistakable. You are important. That man is not. The plane taxied down the runway and soon ascended into the sky, leaving French territory behind, but carrying within its cabin a moment destined to reverberate between two nations. Inside, the cabin environment appeared normal. Passengers relaxed. The seatbelt signs were extinguished. But beneath the surface, something potent was brewing, an unseen storm preparing to break. Traore maintained his composure. He didn't voice complaints, he didn't raise his tone, he didn't contact anyone or reveal his identity. He simply sat quietly, like a spectator watching a narrative unfold, fully aware of how it would conclude. Meanwhile, Claire consciously avoided looking in his direction. There was something about his presence that unnerved her, but she pushed the feeling aside. Midway through the flight, she reappeared at his seat with a forced smile. Would you care for anything to drink, sir? He glanced up at her. Water is fine, he replied. She nodded abruptly and walked away, no apology, no courtesy, no display of respect. The CEO, in stark contrast, was treated like a dignitary. Claire laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he spoke, and inquired about his significant projects in Africa. He replied with casual arrogance, Burkina Faso is fortunate to have us. We are introducing order where chaos exists. Claire nodded in eager agreement, completely unaware that the very person he was disparaging was seated just 2 rows away. One woman in the cabin, an African nurse returning home to Bobo Dioulasso, had witnessed the entire exchange. She shook her head and whispered to her neighbor, "That is our president. They don't even realize who they are disrespecting." Her neighbor's eyes widened in disbelief, but they remained silent. The president clearly desired no special attention, and no one wished to disturb the quiet tension. Hours passed, the cabin lights dimmed, and most passengers slept. But Ibrahim Traoré remained awake, gazing out the window at the clouds. He harbored no anger. He possessed patience. And when the wheels touched the ground in Ouagadougou, that patience would manifest into a defining moment. The aircraft commenced its gradual descent into Ouagadougou. The cabin lights flickered on. The captain announced their impending arrival in both French and English. Passengers stirred, fastened their seatbelts, and prepared for touchdown. Claire moved through the aisle with her clipboard, still smiling warmly at the CEO and completely overlooking Ibrahim Traoré. Outside, the view was stunning. The golden sun over the red earth, the city below awakening as the plane glided downwards. But what no one inside the plane could yet perceive was the substantial procession waiting on the tarmac, lines of black SUVs, military vehicles, and a presidential escort assembling. Within the cabin, hushed whispers began to spread. "Are those soldiers? Are we landing in a conflict zone?" A foreign passenger asked with apprehension. No, that's military procedure," another replied. "Perhaps someone important is arriving." The French CEO smirked. "Must be for me," he chuckled to Claire. She joined his laughter, already preparing to facilitate his disembarkation ahead of the other passengers. She had even intended to personally guide him to the terminal. But the moment the plane ceased moving, the entire atmosphere transformed. Looking out the window, passengers saw presidential guards in immaculate uniform, standing in sharp lines, weapons at their sides, at rigid attention. Behind them stood Burkina Faso's highest-ranking ministers, the Minister of Defense, the Foreign Minister, even the head of National Security, all waiting stoically in the heat, still and imposing like symbols of national authority. Claire peered out the window and gasped. "What is this?" she whispered. The CEO stood up proudly, smoothing his suit. "Clearly this is for me. I told you I'm involved in significant ventures here." But before anyone could even step off the aircraft, a tall officer wearing a black beret boarded. His boots echoed on the floor as he walked deliberately down the aisle, scanning every face. He stopped at seat 2A. Raising his hand to his forehead in a crisp military salute, he spoke, "Monsieur le Président, welcome home." An absolute silence fell over the entire cabin. You could have heard a pin drop. Claire's face drained of color, her eyes darting frantically between the saluting officer and the man she had scorned for the entire flight. Her hands began to tremble. Ibrahim Traoré slowly rose, calm, dignified, utterly silent. The CEO took a step back, his mouth slightly open. "President," he stammered. "That man." Traoré turned and offered him a simple nod, not with anger, not with triumph, but as a man who no longer required words. Another officer stepped forward. "We have directives," he stated coldly, looking directly at Claire and the CEO. "You two will accompany us immediately." "Wait, what?" Claire whispered. "Why me?" "You are being taken into custody for questioning," the officer replied sharply. "You have publicly shown disrespect to the head of state on national territory. That is a grave offense." Claire attempted a nervous laugh, looking around wildly. No, this must be a mistake. I was merely performing my duties." But no one heeded her. Traoré disembarked the plane and was instantly met by his people, his security detail, his ministers, and a cheering crowd beyond the airport perimeter fence. Cameras flashed. The nation's leader had returned, but this time, the truth was undeniable. He had moved among them as an ordinary citizen, and those who had judged him by outward appearance would now face the repercussions. Back on the aircraft, Claire and the CEO were being escorted away in handcuffs. Passengers watched in stunned silence as they descended the stairs, heads lowered, their arrogance utterly dismantled. And this was only the beginning. The tarmac shimmered under the intense Burkina Faso sun, but all eyes were fixed on the two individuals being led away in restraints: Claire, the Air France flight attendant, and the powerful French CEO. Their smug smiles were gone, their air of superiority vanished. In their place was panic, confusion, and sheer disbelief. They were guided into two separate black vehicles, flanked by elite presidential security. No one spoke to them, not even the officers. The silence was more impactful than any shouting. It was the silence of authority reclaimed, of dignity defended. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré addressed a small gathering of the press. He spoke with calm resolve, free from anger, yet his words were sharp and memorable. In Burkina Faso, we do not assess a person's worth based on their skin. We do not bend to wealth or outdated colonial customs. Here, we honor dignity, humanity, and our people. This is the promise of the new Africa. The story spread like wildfire. Videos were leaked online, footage of the arrest, images of the military saluting President Traoré, news clips showing the CEO being escorted away, appearing like a child caught in a transgression. Social media platforms exploded. Hashtags like #RespectAfrica and #StandWithBurkina trended globally. African youth across the continent celebrated, cheering a moment they would never forget. At the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO were formally indicted. The charges included public insult and discrimination towards the head of state, disrespect on Burkinabe territory, abuse of authority, and attempted intimidation. The French embassy attempted to intervene. Calls were made, diplomatic requests were submitted. But President Traoré's response was unequivocal. This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation. They will face the legal process, just as any other citizen. Meanwhile, Air France desperately tried to mitigate the damage. Within 24 hours, the airline released a public statement, a clumsy apology filled with corporate jargon and lacking genuine remorse. But it was insufficient. Burkinabe citizens began calling for a boycott, and other African nations joined the call. Claire, now held in a detention facility outside Ouagadougou, broke down in tears during questioning. "I didn't know who he was," she sobbed. "I was just following procedures." The investigator looked at her with a cold gaze. "You didn't need to know his identity," he stated. "You simply needed to treat him like a human being." The CEO, now facing potential legal repercussions in both Burkina Faso and France, attempted to leverage his influence to escape the situation. But the court delivered a powerful ruling: no immunity, no special treatment. Let justice be applied equally. Traoré never displayed triumph. He never once ridiculed them. He simply returned to the presidential palace and resumed his duties, building infrastructure, empowering the youth, strengthening the military, protecting the nation. But that instant aboard the aircraft transformed to a lasting narrative: a quiet man in a casual top, a flight attendant harboring prejudice, a CEO blinded by arrogance, and an arrival that irrevocably shifted everything.